Hello. Okay, I can hear the feedback when I go on Twitch. Awesome. If audio is good, then great. All right. So I did this poll on Patreon about what I should be doing. And there were three options, which were to continue crayoning, to analyze an existing proposal. So that would be something like the Amtrak map or the Berlin plans for the coming decades. Not decades, just one decade. The Berlin plans for the next 10 or so years. Maybe Grand Paris Express, things like that. And the third option was to talk about what to do to retrofit growing auto-oriented cities with public transportation. So the example that was given to me in the original prompt for this was Houston, but I think it's easier to actually talk not about Houston but about Los Angeles. Los Angeles is not growing very quickly, but that's because it's very NIMBY. It can grow if it wishes to. And the third option won by a very large margin. The poll ended an hour ago, and I actually checked the results a little bit before it ended, but I mean the results don't change in the last 20-30 minutes. There were 33 responses. 2 wanted more crayon, 12 wanted analysis, and 19 wanted the discussion of public transit in growing auto-oriented cities. So, Vox, I want to say, what's the Latin equivalent of Vox Populi, Vox Dei? Followers is sequitori, I think. So patrons would be patronorum, maybe? I don't actually know any Latin. Closest thing I know to Latin is French, which is very different from Latin. La voix des patrons et la voix de Dieu. So let's go on Google Earth and talk a little bit concretely about what it means that you do public transit in auto-oriented cities. And I'm going to start not with Houston, not even with Los Angeles, but I'm going to start with Canadian examples, and the reason is that Canada has been better about TOD than America. Now the best example of a Sunbelt city with decent public transit is Vancouver. But the thing is, people don't really think of Vancouver as an auto-oriented city. And Vancouver, so the problem is, I do not know if Vancouver ever had the model split of, let's say, Los Angeles today. I doubt it, because it was already opening SkyTrain in the 1980s. And in the 1980s, there was still, a pretty large working class that still couldn't afford a car. Los Angeles had higher model split, I think, in the 1980s than today. I know that Portland, metropolitan Portland, it's actually one of the talking points among anti-public transportation people in the United States. That Portland has about the same model split now than it did in the 1980s, which was about 6%. And Los Angeles is about 5 at this point. Now I know that Vancouver in the 90s was 13, but that was after the Expo line had opened, after a lot of the TOD was already in place. So I don't know what Vancouver was in the 70s. I know it was a lot lower density than today, but I do not know whether it was correct to call it auto-oriented in the way that, let's say, the American Sunbelt is auto-oriented. But Calgary might be a better example, just because Calgary Um, so Calgary is very low density still. And the thing is, Calgary is also politically incredibly conservative. So in Vancouver, and I said, so when I lived in Vancouver and I was socializing with gamer people, um, the gaming community in Vancouver was not especially centralized, and yeah, so I would take the subway, not the subway, SkyTrain and bus, an hour and a half, sometimes to Langley, and yeah, there would be people scoring rides at them because that's how auto-oriented the suburbs are. But there's still a lot of green activism there, and Calgary maybe Calgary has that too nowadays, but it's only, but I mean, Calgary is also like very much a conservative city. When I interviewed, there were anti-abortion protesters with photos of aborted fetuses on campus. At the casino, there was some guy talking about how great Trump was. A bunch of people wearing cowboy hats. So maybe it's just a matter that Calgary is culturally still very conservative because I guess the oil industry is. But something really important about Calgary is that its housing is incredibly low density. And this is not something that I got to see very much when I was there because I was mostly around the uni, so that would have been here, I guess. Where you can kind of see the campus. You can walk to that campus, and you have light rail in the median of, I guess, a freeway. It is not as overbuilt as American freeways. It's more like the arterial, but it's more like the really auto-oriented arterials. But the main street crossings are grade separated, so it's colored as if it's a freeway. And you can kind of see, like maybe on this map, the satellite view, that the housing in Calgary is not high density, so maybe here there's something that looks a little big, but most of Calgary, if we just do some Google Earth tourism, these are single-family houses. Now this is a literally random place that I am staring at because it's near the uni. But this is the typical situation for Calgary. And note something. This is right next to Seatrain. So yes, we can see bigger buildings around here. So we see things like these things, but right next to the light rail station, there's already single-family housing. So this is so what I'm trying to establish is that this is a low-density city. Moreover, it's not a city where there's maybe a lot of land that's low density, but most people don't live there. No, this is pretty much everything. So yes, you can see, the occasional tower. It's not like everyone lives this way, but a very large majority of Calgary's population lives like this. I saw a figure that says 90% of Calgary residents live in single-family housing, but I don't believe that it is. But I don't believe it. It's lower, and in the United States it's lower, and Calgary is not that much of a bumpkin place. And again, all of this I'm just Google Earth during a light rail line, so it's not. So this would be the area where we'd see more density, and you can kind of see that this is not even very densely packed. So single-family housing. You can see that it has a lot of it has a lot of cul-de-sacs. So in terms of residential, we don't see TOD here. We don't see transit-oriented development. Again, we sometimes see a little bit. There's the occasional building next to the C train on this line. This is the northwest. This is called what I'm Google Earth drawing right now is called the Northwest LRT. So there are historically 3 lines. This is called South, then Northwest, they throw on, then there is something called Northeast, which is this one. And then more recently they built something called West for possibly more money than the other 3 combined. Like the first 3 lines in Calgary were incredibly cheap. I'm actually going to look for this right now because let's see what I'm going to be able to get out of this, because there's this piece that I read in the 2000s about Calgary's success, which was in so Calgary between 1996 and 2006 had a rise in modal split of 5 percentage points, actually more than Vancouver. So these are the south, so the south end was the first one, then you have the northwest, south, northeast. And then they kind of stalled, like in the construction costs of the West LRT were just so much larger. Let me see if I can, just remember. Yeah. So let's see if this is still, please tell me you're still, okay, so this is the link, which rotted because the internet is very nice, but you can find it. So let me see, are we recording? Is there a way to watch my previous streams by any chance when I upload the, yes. So my first one I did not record because I thought Twitch would auto-record. My second one I did record, but it is 4 hours and 6 gigs. I do not know if I can actually upload it. I will, I am trying. The third one, I'm just slacking, but it was an hour and a half, so I think that is maybe only 1 point something gigs and I can do it. On YouTube probably. Anyway, look at this link. I'm actually going to post the link in chat. It's a really cool paper from 2006 that talks about how Calgary built light rail really cost effectively, and here's what I mean by really cost effectively. This is the last column is the one you should care about. It's dollars. It's 2,000 American dollars per weekday boarding. So in 2020 dollars, you probably want to multiply by maybe 1.4, but ridership is of course higher at this point. Although not that much higher on a lot of systems. Calgary's is higher. A lot of systems have sadly stalled, and the thing is, so for example, Portland is not usually cheap, and we're talking about, and I keep talking about New York construction costs. So first of all, Northeast New Jersey, so that would be HBLR, that is the second most expensive per kilometer on this list. The Buffalo system is partly a subway, and it's the most expensive per rider. This is what happens in New York. These costs, I mean, they don't exist in America anymore. None of them. Like, so, no, okay. I mean, so the person just pinged me as a friend who's who I've known for 25 years. We can talk to later. So, with all of these systems, something to remember is that nowadays in America you start from 40 and go up. I mean, the systems, so in Europe, you can still sometimes find things this cost, the point is that the Calgary cost 2,400 is non-existent, forget about it, it doesn't exist. The Paris light rail lines were mid four figures in euros. I think T1, T2, and T3 were maybe 4,000, 5,000. Metro 14, I believe, was, I can actually check the ridership of Paris Metro line 14. So what was the ridership? So what is the ridership of? So 83.3. I'm going to convert it as a 300 to 1 basis, even though it's not perfectly correct. Okay, so M14 is 277, 278, and so we said 277, 278, and instead of guessing, I can actually look things up. 1211. So this is the cost in euros of 2004. of Paris Metro Line 14. And then the conversion to dollars, I mean, at the time it went different because Europe has just not had as much inflation as the US has. But I mean, if you want to convert it to $2,000, I mean, it's maybe 5,000 at some point. So my point is that, even by, let's say, Parisian standards, which were very good at the time, they're still decent, Calgary had this really cost-effective system. And they talk a lot about this, and one of the things that they mention is that it's not just low cost. I mean, yes, the costs are on the low side, but I mean, it's twice as much as Sacramento, and the per rider cost is barely a quarter. And note that also Edmonton is also the second lowest, so just Canada being better than America. Like, this is where you start seeing things like Jared Walker saying that the United States should not envy Europe but envy Canada. A lot of it comes from really successful things that Canada did from the 1980s to the 2000s before Americanization caught up with it. So they're talking here in this document, which is really good, and I'm not going to just read over it because I literally posted a link in chat. But what they're doing is mostly, so they talk about how they do cost control, but I mean, the cost control was not obviously incredibly different from anywhere else. The really important differences is how they ensured high ridership, and what they did is they built city center. So this is how downtown Calgary looks, and our eye altitude is going to be, our eye altitude is right now 3.46 kilometers, which is not a number I'm going to remember, so I'm going to make it 3. Make it exactly 3. Okay, 3, awesome. 3.1, it's close enough. Alright, so something that we're going to do is we're going to compare this with other city centers in very Sunbelt-y places. I mean, in places that are, for one, Sunbelt with actual sun, rather than Calgary, where the weather is not exactly Southern California or Texas. I was there in September, I would know. So you see that there's all these buildings, and you might also, I'm not sure how obvious it is at this zoom level, or if I need to zoom in a little bit more, but there isn't that much parking. So yeah, sure, here there's a parking lot, but it's mostly building, skyways between buildings. This is actually a big problem for any kind of elevated construction. And they talk about doing a second trunk, so this is the trunk of C-Train. They're talking about doing a north-south trunk, but it would have to be tunneled, and the topography for this is rather shit, because maybe they want to go around here. Look at the elevation. It's 80, and then it descends to 1040 at the river, and it remains 1040-ish through city center. So if you need to be tunnel here, it's actually difficult to go above ground just outside. So they're talking about long tunnels. So this is definitely a problem with the future of Calgary public transit. But I mean, their modal split is 16%. I mean, it's San Francisco. So how did they do this? So the point I'm making is that you see this kind of dense forest of towers and city center, and yeah, sure, there's the occasional parking lot. I think there are also some parking structures, but it's very densely spaced buildings, not a lot of parking. The price of parking in downtown Calgary is actually very high, but by North American standards, and also by European ones. I mean, there's a lot of parking in European city centers. I was actually when I moved to New York and I saw the parking prices there, I was actually shocked at how high they were because I was used to Singapore and the Riviera. So it's so it's not like Europe is really. It's not like Europe is following Donald Shoup or anything. Shoup. The person who wrote the High Cost of Free Parking, whose first name is Donald, what is the pronunciation of his last name? By the way, Norpub, am I pronouncing it correctly? Is it Norgepab? I mean, just type it in chat and we'll get it right afterward. Rides per capita in Calgary on the C train, I think I want to say they're 90 million per year, so they're comparable to New York City in rides per capita. So no, it's not just commutes. And it cannot be just commutes because I mean we know what the modal split is in New York City. It's about twice that of Calgary, on roughly the same rate of ridership per capita, maybe somewhat higher in New York, but not by much. So no, it's not just commutes. And the point is that you have this. But the point is that you have this really strong city center, and this is not some kind of intact historic city center, and you can kind of tell by the fact that these buildings are in no way, shape, or form historic buildings. Like this building. What about this random building that I'm staring at right now? This is clearly not a historic building, right? I mean, the style of this building. I mean, this is not how buildings used to look. This is not some historic pre-war anything, right? This is buildings built in the 1980s and 90s and 2000s based on these styles that were in fashion in from the 1970s onward. They redeveloped the parking lots. So this is this kind of forest of densely spaced, not enormous, but pretty big towers. So for example, this one, it's 1170 versus 1040 something. So this is 125 meters, right? And this is maybe more. This is more like 150. So yeah, I mean, again, these are not super tall. Calgary is a tiny city. Calgary is about 1.2 million people. And if you're asking if it's city or metro area, the answer is yes. Calgary, the way this works is that it's kind of annexed the entire metro area, and Edmonton is the same. So try to remember what the Forest of Towers looks like at 3 kilometers, and now I don't want to compare this with Houston actually, because Houston is a much larger city. So let's do Nashville. Nashville is a very booming southern city. I think it might actually be the wealthiest big metropolitan area in the American South per capita. But it's been growing very quickly in the last 10 or 20 years. I mean, I don't think people thought of it as Sunbelt 20 years ago. I think people still thought of Tennessee as Appalachia, maybe. Until the city kind of votes that way. So for example, in the 2000s and early 2000s, Tennessee became more Republican, kind of like, let's say, Kentucky, West Virginia, rather than more Democratic, like, let's say, Virginia, North Carolina. But Nashville, economically, is a very booming city. So let's look at what it's like at 3 kilometers, which is pretty close to where we are. So can you kind of say that it's just not nearly as big of a city center? Now, I do have, in theory, job counts by census tract in Canada, but it's nowhere near as nice as is on the map. But can you kind of say that this is just not Calgary? Yes, you have tall buildings. It's a North American city center, but they're not as closely spaced. It's usually so you have this UBS building. Okay, so this is 145. This is 255. Okay, so it's a nice skyscraper. It's 110-ish meters. But why is my computer giving me problems? But the point is, the rest of I gotta ask, when my monitor flickers on and off, do you see the flickers or do you see it work? So the point is, can you kind of see that the buildings, it's not as uniformly tall. You have random parking, like this is parking, 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 small, small. All of these are small, small parking. You can kind of see there's just so much more parking in Nashville, in city center, and fewer big buildings than the central business district of Calgary. And so you have this thing where just outside downtown you're already single family, but that's also true of Calgary. So we have single family housing tracts right near city centers, and we also know that there are more freeways in the US than Canada. Calgary is not a very freeway oriented city. The link that I just put specifically said that they chose to build light rail because it had higher capacity into city center than freeways. But let's not turn Calgary into ecotopia. It is not. Freeway. This is basically a freeway. Not quite, but basically a freeway. Beltway. Freeway. This is a freeway. A bunch of these non-freeways are roads that Chuck Maroon would not approve of. Very wide, very fast car traffic. So Calgary is not a ban cars type city. It's just a city where you have just a bigger downtown, a bigger commercial downtown. And yes, again, there are parking craters, but I mean, you can kind of see like this bigger mass of tall buildings. And this is not something that you see as much in American auto-oriented cities. So when we talk about how to make transit work in auto-oriented cities, remember Calgary has abnormally low operating costs, and it's not because they have some weird secret sauce they really don't. It's not because they underpay their workers. On the contrary, Calgary, maybe not now, but up until maybe 2014 when the oil prices began crashing, Calgary was an incredibly wealthy city. So I mean, unions and unions doesn't matter. I mean, there's a level of wealth beyond which it doesn't matter. I mean, you're just going to have to pay people very high wages. It's just that in Calgary they have really high ridership. So this is a decently successful public transportation system. I mean, it's good? No. I mean, it's not. I mean, the modal split is 15%, 16%. This is not a good number. I mean, in Berlin, I keep complaining. I think we're low 40s. In Paris, I kept complaining. We were 43. So, but remember, American auto-oriented cities basically top at 6. Portland is 6. LA is 5. There are cities. I think Detroit is 1. So that is what Calgary does. Now let's look at LA for a moment. Now in LA, we will find a lot of downtown skyscrapers. Okay, I'm gonna warn you. It's not. I mean, it's not gonna be the sort of joke that Calgary has more tall buildings than LA. I mean, let's not get too excited. Okay, so we see lots of skyscrapers, and also importantly, these are going to be taller than the ones in Calgary. So if you grow up watching Will Smith flicks, like I did, aging millennials represent, you will remember the scene in Independence Day where the scene in which aliens blast through the US Bank Tower. So this one. So 91 at ground level, 401 at the helicopter level, so it's 310. Calgary is not 310 meters skyscrapers, it's 120, 150. So LA, but I mean, LA is a bigger city. No shit, LA has a big downtown by Calgary standards. Calgary is a metropolitan area of about 1.2, 1.3 million people. LA is a metropolitan area of 18, 19 million people. So, I mean, no shit, LA is going to be bigger. And moreover, there's also some history here. I mean, you can kind of see that near downtown, you don't see tracts of single-family housing. You see this, okay? I mean, this, not single-family housing, which doesn't mean that LA doesn't have to live single-family housing. It does. I mean, you can find even decently close to downtown places that clearly need rebuilding, like Silver Lake, or especially if you go not quite downtown but somewhat far from downtown, like you see this part. The purple line is, I believe, supposed to run non-stop. Sorry, it's supposed to run non-stop from Western to, I believe, Highland. If I'm wrong, then even further. We're talking like 3 kilometers of interstation, just because, can you see what there is in LA? It's not even single family housing, although it is. It's enormous single family housing. It's very wealthy, very low density. You can kind of see the like you can kind of see how everyone has a private swimming pool. Not everyone, but a lot of people. So the point is not that all of this needs to turn into Kowloon Old City or London Terrace or something else that's dense and tall, but rather that yes, this exists in LA, but this also exists in Calgary, much closer to city center. It's just that in Calgary, the important thing is that they got a commercial city center, and when you have a commercial city center, people will take trains there. So I don't have a reference on this, I'm sorry, but in Los Angeles, I'm told that half of or roughly, of the people who work in downtown LA ride public transit. This is about the same ratio as in Calgary, I believe. I think in the mid-2000s, might have been even in the PDFs that I linked to, their goal was to increase the share of downtown commuters who use public transport. I think at the time it was 45%. They wanted to go over 50, or maybe to go to 55. It might be somewhat, I mean, it might be somewhat higher than LA, but it's going to be by a few percent, or maybe lower than LA by a few percent. I mean, 50 versus 40 or 55 versus 45, that's not the difference that explains why Calgary has a 15 or 16% modal split, and LA has a 5% modal split. Rather, it's the size of city center. Again, LA is, in absolute terms, a larger city center. I'm sure this is bigger than anything in Berlin, for example, but Berlin is not a large city. Berlin is a medium-sized city. Okay, we have city proper about the same population as LA, maybe even slightly less, and we have very few suburbs because the city annexed all its suburbs 100 years ago. And so what you want is, and now it's going to be the on the map time, because I think a bunch of people like that tool, and it's so if you're doing any kind of transit analysis or any kind of really urbanist analysis in the United States, it's really useful to know this on the map tool. So this is the address onthemap.cs.census.gov. There are two databases that are used for commuting in America. This is one of them. It's called LEHD. You can even see LEHD home. The other is from the American Community Survey. They sometimes spit out different numbers. So let's go around LA and try to figure out how big downtown LA is. And this is where I start talking about polycentricity and strong and weak centers. There's this kind of myth going around that LA is a polycentric city. So what we're going to do, so there's Basemap where you can start, where you can query something and get it immediately. but and we can even do something like write Los Angeles, search only in counties, but we can also do it with selection. So Los Angeles County, California. Perform analysis. We want all jobs. And it's going to be a giant ass map because 10 million people in LA County. And you see 4.7 million work. And this is going to map down to the block level where the Census Bureau thinks people work. And there are two things that are called the point overlay. These are the circles of various sizes that we see. Big circles, many jobs in the block, smaller circles, fewer jobs. And this is averaged out to densities. You can kind of see as colors as faded blue versus dark blue. It's called the thermal overlay here. And meanwhile, I'm scrolling very slowly because it's taking the system time to think. So the legend is not fixed. It depends on the geography of Salah. So LA is a big city, so the top we see is 278,938 jobs per square mile. If we did the same in New York, we would even see a higher number. If we did this outside the city center, the top number would be lower, and likewise these numbers differ based on what's available. So if we kill the point overlay and do just thermal, it's okay, we have downtown LA here. Now, there are a bunch of ways to figure out job counts in downtown LA, because what the hell is downtown LA? Is it just the bluest color? Is it the entire thing? Is it a radius from the train station? The train station, by the way, is not within this highest densities. No, the train station is on the wrong side of the freeway. It's on the wrong side of the 101, which is a big problem for TOD and LA. But for the subway at least, I mean, the subway passes right through the center. I mean, this is where the skyscrapers are. Financial District, Bunker Hill. Tab out. Remember that this is not perfectly, you need to rotate it in your head a little bit because it won't even let me, it won't even let me rotate, but, so we're slightly rotated, but the point is this is literally where the skyscrapers are, which can make sense. I mean, I'm showing you skyscrapers, 200, 300 meters, they're office towers. Yes, this is where the highest job density is going to be. So what I like doing is looking at the central 100 square kilometers. I'm forgetting if I mentioned this in an older video. I could try to find the INSEE data. Actually, I may even be able to get to the INSEE data. So this is a blog post that I wrote about how LA is not, about how LA does not have a big central business district. So for example, I did this analysis of central business districts, but these boundaries are pretty arbitrary. So in LA, I gave it a 2 square kilometer area and found that it had somewhat fewer than 200,000 jobs. And then, so that is basically comparable, maybe even a little less than San Francisco, which is a much smaller city, or Washington. But I then, so let me find Parisian things. Okay, so here, for example, our numbers, oh my god. Okay, so now I need to figure out what the correct thing to do with INSEE, because apparently my link rotted. So this is INSEE let me see if I can find this. Metadonnées. Oh no, it's going to be dossier complet, I think. This one should be. No, this is, oh my god, Google is literally sending me to the dead link. My point is that in Paris, le code officiel, limité open. Okay. Let's not make this about me trying to struggle with Insta. I'm just going to say that Insta has job density data that apparently link routed, but it is not at the block level, like on the map, or like the Canadian data that I have. It is at the municipal or arrondissement level. The land area of Paris is close to 100 square kilometers. You add La Défense, and you get to 100 square kilometers. So, just for comparability, where Paris has, I want to say, 2.3 million workers in that geography. Let's look at LA, and then we're going to do 100 square kilometers, and the rule is that this should be a contiguous-ish area, like we're allowed to hop water, so we're allowed to do San Francisco and Oakland, but we're not allowed to randomly gerrymander just downtown LA, just Century City, just El Segundo, just downtown Burbank. And the point that I'm going to be making is that none of these is a particularly large job center. I mean, Century City, I believe, is about 30,000. That's supposed to be LA's second downtown. El Segundo, I think 50,000 maybe. Culver City. So, I mean, you do have job centers, they're just tiny. 30,000 is not a lot. I mean, Long Island City is, I think, 60,000. So, it's either that or downtown Brooklyn would be the second largest in New York City. And people do not think of New York as a polycentric city. So if the larger secondary districts in LA are half the size of those of New York, LA is not polycentric. So by the way, we're going to be drawing shapes because we're going to try to hit 100 square kilometers, and I'm allowing myself to gerrymander. So I'm allowing myself to create a shape that is not going to be perfectly centered around downtown LA, but rather is allowed to creep west to respect the fact that jobs creep west rather than east. But I'm not allowed to draw like a ribbon. Like, I mean, the amount of gerrymandering that I'm permitting is limited. And let's just see what I can get to. So clear selection, this is the selection bit. There's going to be a layer here where I'm going to kill because otherwise it's going to take me to the entire county. And we're going to draw a polygon. So let's just, okay, this is the thing. So we probably want the entirety of greater downtown LA. What happened? Let's do this. It's going to be too much. This is UCLA. It's also big. Santa Monica. Venice. I'm just going to do this and then work by subtraction afterward. Glendale, Burbank. If this is smaller than I think, then I will try to grow it toward El Segundo. So we do confirm selection. Yeah, this is 100 square miles. I need 100 square kilometers for comparability. But let's just look what we have. I like the, Northrop, thanks for the links for the model splits. So about LA being closer to New York, to Tokyo than New York, no. Tokyo, I mean, I'm not going to do it on stream because it's going to take me half an hour to remember the length, but you can actually do the same 100 square kilometers thing with Tokyo. Get jobs. So in Tokyo as in Paris, the jobs are not terribly granular, the data, but you can get data at the level of the special ward of Tokyo. So you can do maybe, let's say, Chiyoda, Minato, Chuo, Shinjuku, Shibuya, Toshima. I don't think they are 100, but you can then do, I'm forgetting what exactly you can do, but you can do the ones that are basically the central and near central ones, and within that region I think you're getting 3.5 million jobs or something, or 4 million jobs. You're getting more than New York within the same area. Now in LA we're getting 1.3 million, but remember it's not 100 square kilometers, it's 100 square miles. So we need to start shrinking this a little bit. And again, I'm not permitting myself to draw something that looks like an amoeba. So I'm gonna not give up on Century City yet, but I'm gonna give up on a lot of other shit. So I'm gonna do this. So I'm already giving up on parts of downtown. Forget Culver City. I'm not giving up on Santa Monica yet, but I might need to do this in a sec. So let's do this. And this is already not convex. Okay, so this is 63 square miles and we need 100 square kilometers, which is a little less than 40 square miles, right? Because 38.61. Okay, so we're already at barely a million, and we still need to do some cuts. So yes, we can do some gerrymandering, clear selection, draw polygon. But the point is that LA is just very weakly centered. Again, I can maybe possibly be a little tighter here. Like, this is actually making me feel a little dirty. The way that I'm turning it into a kind of crescent. I mean, it's fine for it to be a crescent. I mean, it's a crescent that will eventually have a subway called the Purple Line. But it's not even one downtown blob or anything. It's a long crescent. And the Purple Line isn't even going to go to Santa Monica. It's only being planned to go up to UCLA because the construction cost. I think they dropped the Santa Monica option in the 2000s because of high costs. People were calling it at the time the subway to the sea. So a lot of early transit bloggers, Jeff Wood, for example, had these banners called "I support the subway to the sea." So the idea was to extend the Purple Line all the way to Santa Monica and not just to UCLA. So okay, this is already 47 point something, so we're getting there, but we're going to go under a million. Barely, but we're under a million and we still need to do cuts. We might need to actually give up Santa Monica at this point. Either give up Santa Monica or become even more of a ribbon. And I'm going to say, okay, this is too ugly. I'm doing comparability with Europe. And in what I'm doing in, let's say, other parts of America that are like New York, I'm not being as dirty with the gerrymandering. Or in San Francisco, I'm just cutting it at. So I'm gonna cut this at the 405. Yeah, so this is just over. This is 40.6, and we should be 38.6. So this is sub 900. So we have this blob around LA, which is gerrymandered for maximum job density, more or less. If we were allowed to include El Segundo, yeah, we could hit more Burbank, but remember, El Segundo is not that big. Century City is not that big. So this is about 900. So this is Century City. You can even tell where it is by the street network because Century City. So if you want to talk about how you can make a city less auto-oriented using transit, LA is a really good example of what not to do because here's Century City with this really big road that was supposed to be the main street. Now, can you tell what there is on both sides of Century City? Apparently one of these is this really venerable country club that was so fancy there weren't even like Jews in, and then the other one, so this is one of them, and the other one is the one that the Jews started back maybe in the 50s or 60s when the Jews started having enough money for this shit. And the venerable one you can't close because apparently it's too venerable, and the Jewish one you can't close because people think that it's anti-Semitic. So the point is that this is the land use near what is called LA's second downtown. In Calgary we have a lot of single-family housing. There are no golf courses next to downtown Calgary. And if we look at the core of Century City, so that would be, let's call it this area, so Century Park, let's include these buildings, like just go south, east of this. And by the way, the subway's going to hit it right in the middle. The subway's going to hit it here. They even have had to fight Beverly Hills over this because the subway's going under Wilshire. So this is Wilshire. Now, it's not going straight under Wilshire because this is Condo Canyon, which is interesting, but it's just residential. They wanted to hit Century City. So what they're going to do is they're going to go whip around Rodeo, whip under Beverly Hills, and Constellation. Apparently it's going to go under the high school, and people in Beverly Hills are pissed off because if a subway is built underneath Beverly Hills, it is morally equivalent to genocide or something. They sued, they lost. And then from here they're going to go whip back to Wilshire for LA, for UCLA. So these are the boundaries of Century City. Let's look at how many jobs we're talking about. No Common, so we said Century Park. We need to go to slightly east of Century Park East. Santa Monica. Confirm selection. This is half a square mile, so this is a little more than a square kilometer with 50,000 jobs. This is not nothing. I mean, 50,000 jobs is a nice secondary center. This does not make you polycentric. Okay, I mean, polycentric assumes that the other things are actually centers. 50,000 in a metropolitan area the size of Los Angeles is not a center. And the same is going to be true if you look at, let's say, El Segundo, let alone things like downtown Burbank. So you don't have a lot of job density in LA. And there's this kind of meme that LA is polycentric. Again, 50,000 is not polycentric. 50,000 is polycentric if you're a city the size of Worcester. Or a city the size of Providence. Maybe I should talk more about cities that actually lived in. So in a city the size of Providence, absolutely 50,000 is a good center, but I mean, not in a city the size of LA. Remember, the 100 square kilometers have 900,000. This is 50 of those 900,000. So, and it's not like the rest are centers, they're just random jobs all over the west side. And you don't, because there's no job centralization in LA, it means everything is downstream of that. So LA actually has a subway, okay? LA has a subway. I keep saying that it doesn't have public transit. I will defend my assertion that LA doesn't have public transit, but it has a subway and it has buses. The subway is even depicted here. So you can kind of see the purple line, the red line, to North Hollywood. From North Hollywood to what points west that are not shown as lines on the map, you have a BRT line called the Orange Line. There's a commuter line, there's a commuter rail system that is shockingly poorly used. It could be turned into an S-Bahn, but they don't know what an S-Bahn is. There are activists in there that keep pushing for what's called Electrolink, the proposal, but Metrolink keeps looking for reasons not to do it. You have light rails. You have the Expo line that goes right up to Santa Monica. It's just slow. There's the blue line, which shares trunk with the Expo line, and then goes all the way down to Long Beach. And it's called, and it's a light rail line. It runs light rail vehicles, but most of the line is like grade separated. I mean, it's mostly in like they've used a lot of Pacific Electric rights of way that are often grade separated, or even when not, they have crossing gates. So it's not a streetcar, or not even a streetcar with dedicated lanes. It's actually like mostly rapid transit. It's just, I don't want to call it a Stadtbahn because a Stadtbahn implies that the central segments are tunneled, and actually the central segment is not tunneled here. The central segment is on the surface. and probably that should be tunneled for capacity, but that's not why the ridership is low. Ridership is low fundamentally because there's not a lot of ridership. Sorry, no. Ridership. I'm not going to say ridership is low because there's not a lot of ridership. Ridership is low because there's not a lot of job density in downtown LA. And remember, half of the people who work in downtown LA, I believe, take transit there. But the thing is, as soon as you work, not downtown LA, even within the 100 square kilometer radius, I mean, if you're working somewhere in, let's say, Koreatown, okay, or you're working in Hollywood, you probably have a car, because for all other purposes than going to downtown LA, you need a car, okay? If you live, I'm gonna make up random neighborhoods of LA right now, okay? Let's say you live in Thai Town, which is gonna be somewhere around here. I don't know if it's actually gonna show on Google Earth, but Thai Town is roughly this part of LA. So you live in Thai Town. Okay, so you work in downtown LA, yeah, sure, you can rely on the red line. But first of all, downtown LA is so weak that you don't know that you will always work in downtown LA, right? I mean, maybe, let's say you're a lawyer, okay? Let's say let's invent a person, and we're going to invent a person, and specifically going to invent a person who's not poor. There are poor people who take public transit because they can't afford a car. But that's usually not the base of public transit, because people like that tend to get a car as soon as they can afford one, or as soon as they think they can afford one, and then they drive a beer and its maintenance is terrible, and they hope that the car is not going to die on them on their way to work. But they still get the car because the buses suck that much. The problem in LA, for example, yes, you can take a bus. The bus is going to be about 3 times slower than driving. And part of it is bad frequency, but I mean, when you're trying to get from, again, making up neighborhoods right now, from Gardena, let's say, or let alone San Pedro. So when you're trying to get from San Pedro, or like from anywhere this entire corridor far south, to anywhere in the center, it doesn't matter what the bus frequency is. I mean, when the bus takes an hour, like a bus that takes an hour, when it takes you 25 minutes to drive, it doesn't matter if the bus comes every 10 minutes or every 20, it's still gonna suck. So the problem is, yes, frequency is freedom. Frequency is freedom when the bus takes half an hour or 20 minutes. The bus does not take 20 minutes if the car takes 20 minutes. The bus takes 20 minutes in LA if the car takes 6. And again, this is maybe specific to LA because it's so huge, but Houston is not a small city. Dallas is not a small city. And what this means is that you can create a rail network that will get people decently fast. My understanding is that the subway, where it exists, actually beats cars reliably during rush hour. It's slower off-peak, but it's not much slower. I believe factor of 1.5. People will depend on the subway at a factor of 1.5. I live in Berlin. I know that for a lot of my trips, a car would be faster. I have no idea about parking, by the way, because I do not drive. I do not know how to drive. It's not like I live with other people who drive or something, so it's not like I can tell you, oh yeah, sure, when board game nights come back, I can just drive to Friedrichshain and it's going to be really easy. I don't know, because I don't know how easy it is to park in Friedrichshain. But my point is that, not counting time spent looking for parking, I see what the roads are like. I think one time I even got I hitched a ride back when it was 2 a.m. Cars are going to be faster. It's just that they're not going to be much faster. They're not. For a lot of destinations that I would travel to pre-corona, the U-Bahn and the S-Bahn really are faster. Not to mention, it costs thousands of euros a year to own and keep a car, and I'm spending. Not now because of Corona, but pre-Corona, it's 84, I believe, euros a month on the on the U-Bahn and the S-Bahn, yeah, I'm gonna take the U-Bahn and the S-Bahn. And the point is that in LA, so we have this hypothetical lawyer who lives in Thai town. The lawyer who lives in Thai town can totally take the subway. It's actually very likely that if our lawyer works in downtown LA, then they take the subway. And if our lawyer lives in Santa Monica, close to the Expo line, it's plausible that they're taking the Expo line, even though it's slower. Although they might also, but they're definitely owning a car, and that is the first problem. You're not convincing people to give up driving entirely if the subway. Remember, in Calgary, remember the question that I got in chat in Calgary about off-peak trips? LA is not like that, okay? I mean, it has American levels of off-peak transit usage. So our destinations in Calgary are very likely to be downtown. In LA, they're much less likely. And what this means is that our Thai town lawyer or maybe our Santa Monica lawyer, yes, they can say, okay, I am leaving the car at home. Downtown LA has a lot of traffic. Parking might be a problem, but if you're earning downtown lawyer salary, you can pay for parking. That's not a problem. In fact, it's possible that you're even getting it as a job perk. But you can say, okay, I don't want to deal with traffic. I'm going to take the Expo line or I'm going to take the Red line to work. But here's the thing. This hypothetical lawyer of ours is not going to choose to become transit dependent because they know that maybe they're going to get a job somewhere else. Okay, and I say this knowing very well-off middle-class professionals in Los Angeles. So and I know what parts of the city they said, oh, I'm going to probably work here or there. So I'm saying lawyer is not a randomly selected middle-class profession. I could even say engineer maybe. Same thing. So our lawyer knows that yes, right now they work at a firm downtown, but they're probably not going to work for one firm their entire life. Okay, it's America, it's not Japan. And it's possible that they might even need to travel for work to meet with clients, maybe. Our lawyer knows that it's very likely that they're gonna, in the future, work in Century City. Our lawyer, let's say we're talking someone with your typical liberal millennial values. So if they're married, their partner also probably is going to have a very solidly middle class job, which is unlikely to be in downtown LA. Why is it unlikely to be in downtown LA? Well, in general, someone who lives in LA is unlikely to work in downtown LA because remember the county has we saw on the map the county has 4.8 million jobs, maybe 4.6, I'm forgetting. And in a blob of 100 square kilometers, which is gerrymandered to include not just downtown, the actual downtown, but also places that don't even have subways yet, like Century City. Even then, it's only 900,000. So, conditioned on one partner working in downtown LA, the other partner can work anywhere. I mean, we know something about this other partner because usually because there's something called homogamy. People tend to date and marry within broadly the same social class. And we know that the way it expresses itself today is through both partners taking jobs of similar pay levels, whereas let's say in the 1950s or in the Victorian era, women who were respectably middle class did not work, so they stayed at home, and so the homogamy would be maybe correlation between the income of the husband and the father-in-law, but now it's correlation between the incomes of the husband and the wife, or the two partners if it's same sex, doesn't matter. And the point is that what we know is that people don't generally date within the same firm. it happens, but it's not typical. It's typical to date within the same class. So our lawyer, their partner, again, solidly degreed professional, but the partner has no reason to be working downtown. I mean, the partner could be an engineer, the partner could be a tech worker, the partner could be a doctor, the partner could be a dentist, the partner could be the partner. I'm trying to think. I'm blanking on these kinds of upper middle class jobs that are specific to Hollywood because I don't know the film industry very well, and my understanding is that the film industry is kind of weird in that it doesn't have mass upper middle class employment the way tech and finance do. So I can't rattle off to you LA specific things, but I'm sure they exist. And of course there's finance in LA. I mean, you don't become a city of 18 million people without finance, even if you're not New York. So the point is that the other partner works probably outside downtown. So the household now has a car because the other partner has to drive, because if you live in Tightown and you're working in Century City, you are not taking the subway. When they extend the purple line, in theory you could do a wrong way transfer, so a red line to Wilshire and Vermont and then purple line back, but it's going to be far faster to drive the whole thing, especially with the frequencies that we're talking about. And then they're going to socialize. And again, we know something about the classedness of socialization. Again, it's within subcultures that are within a very broad class. So I know, for example, what the classedness of public transit advocacy is. Okay, and again, it's it's not uniformly upper middle class. It's not uniformly middle class. But it tilts that way. But it doesn't tilt necessarily in specific places. So yes, you'd expect there to be a lot of engineers, because people who are very interested in trains might become railroad engineers. It's a career that you do in the field, and they could do like what. But I know who, for example, the people at Transit Matters are, the people I know through New York public transit advocacy, the people who contribute to my Patreon. I'm not going to rattle off all of your names, but thank all of you. So we're seeing engineers, we're seeing academics in many different fields, we're seeing lawyers, we're seeing doctors. Again, I'm not going to portray it as exclusively upper middle class. It really isn't. There are quite a lot of public transit advocates who are nowhere near that comfortable. But my point is that even if you look at this interest, people are not necessarily going to be selected for a specific workplace. They're going to be selected for maybe a broad class to some extent. Again, I emphasize to some extent. But you can't rely on the fact that they're all going to be downtown people. So the point is that even if you, the lawyer who lives in Tightown, or Santa Monica or wherever, can take the train downtown, your socialization is going to be with people who, by and large, don't work downtown. So they all drive. They think of downtown as a place that you can't easily get to because there's traffic. If they don't work downtown, they have to pay downtown parking rates, which, again, LA is not a Shupian city, but it's not like parking is free in downtown LA, and if you try to build enough parking that were effectively free, there would be even fewer jobs downtown than there are there today. So you have people who don't think much about downtown. So yeah, all of your socialization is going to be based on the needs of drivers. And so you yourself can be the person who uses transit to get to work, but it's very unlikely you will choose to become transit dependent. So you will own a car, you will drive it, you will drive it to all purposes except work, because even in Berlin, for most purposes other than work and school, cars are useful. Okay, I walk to the supermarket. If I had a car, I would probably drive it, and then I would probably do larger trips, and I would probably look for a bigger supermarket. than the local alley. But the point is that you need some kind of base level of what I call long trips. So work trips, school trips. If you're socializing, it would be things like going to a convention, rather than just going to the neighborhood pub with your friends. But by the way, going to a gaming club with people from all over the city is a long trip. It's outside of the neighborhood, let's call it outside the norm, because everyone goes to the supermarket. Most people go out to like a pub or a restaurant in the neighborhood. But and sure, people socialize, but most people who socialize don't socialize at one specific thing, because socialization is many, many different subcultures. So for example, for me it would be gaming, but most people aren't gamers, and for them they would socialize at something else. So, and likewise, most people aren't queer, so queer clubs are also an unusual thing. I mean, everyone is unusual in something. I mean, your hobby, by definition, is not shared by a large majority of the population. But I mean, so maybe you're gonna socialize with people from all over the city. So that would be a long trip. It's a trip that the neighborhood itself probably can't provide for you. And all of these in a city like LA have to be done by car. And the way to get out of this, so what they're trying to do is to build an ever transit system, but that's not going to work. You can't do it on a bus because the bus is never going to be fast enough. Yes, you can even give the bus dedicated lanes. It will not be fast enough. Okay, so in the Brooklyn bus proposal that Eric Goldwyn and I wrote, that I'm going to actually link to, Brooklyn bus redesign. Eric Goldwyn. This one. Oh, shalom. Okay, I have never watched Curb Your Enthusiasm, so I do not know what its plot points are. I don't even know what it's about. Like, I've never seen, for example, The Big Bang Theory, but I vaguely know what it's about. I have no idea what Curb Your Enthusiasm is about. It's not that I'm against it or anything, just haven't watched it. Anyway, so my point is, we wrote this bus redesign that you can go peruse. In fact, you should go and peruse. In fact, this is kind of the thing that convinced people that we were real and that they should give us money to do bigger things, like the construction costs report. So we have these key interventions for speeding up the buses. So so the average speed right now in Brooklyn is 11. And I believe what we're promising is 15. I don't know if it's actually said in it. Yeah, we believe that with all of these treatments, the average Brooklyn bus speed would rise from 11 kilometers an hour to about 15, an increase of about 36%. Now I want to make it very clear, 11 to 15, especially with the frequency boosts, is amazing. What it is not is something that makes people who own a car ride the bus over 15 kilometers when the car is available. Okay, the car, I mean, speed in traffic in a car is terrible. This is why God, and by God I mean Thomas McDonald, invented the freeway. I don't think it was Thomas McDonald who invented the freeway, but the construction of the roads in America was substantially done by Thomas McDonald, so he deserves the credit and the blame. And this means that if you're in, let's say, I don't know, again, Gardena, a place like that, the bus is going to slog in traffic up Western or up Vermont. You, in the car, don't go that way. You go whoop on the 110, and yes, there's traffic. Even in traffic, you're beating a bus. You're beating a subway when you're on the freeway. And yeah, then you're going down to surface streets, and it's slow, but in the same way that average speed is much higher if you have long interstations between stops on a subway. In a car, you go fast on the freeway and slow on surface streets, and if it's a long distance, more of it can be done on the freeway. Can the buses go on the freeway? Sure, they will suck, because if I live around here, okay, and not knowing enough about LA, I don't even know if this is the sort of neighborhood that a middle class professional will live in, but it doesn't matter. If I live here and I own a car, for me it's not a problem at all to take the car, go whoop, whoop, this is an on-ramp, get on, and then I get off and I go on surface streets. Now, this is a freeway that actually has a bus on it. It's called the Silver Line. And you see they even have a light rail station in the middle of a four-level interchange, so that people can change to the bus. I'm not even gonna look. I know nobody boards here. And the bus even has bus lanes. I don't know if you can see the bus lanes here. Yeah, you can see it says. No, this is I guess it's Express. But anyway, the point is there are buses in the middle of a freeway. Who likes waiting in the middle of a freeway for a bus? Raise your hands in chat. Do you like standing in the middle of a freeway to wait for the bus? Anyone? Does anyone like, okay, as long as it has a cover, okay. Sure. In the middle of the freeway, yeah, you could do it. By the way, remember, the C-Train has decent cover, but it's still really noisy. It's worse at the bus stations. So you're telling people from, I don't know, anywhere around here, that they're gonna walk right to the freeway, and it's probably gonna be a long walk, because who the fuck wants to live right next to the freeway? Now, if this were a station that is not in the middle of the freeway, oh yeah, I would love living, 1 minute from the station, that's DOD. Who the hell wants to live 1 minute on foot from the freeway? It's noisy. So people live 15 minutes on foot from the freeway, so then it's a 15-minute walk, which is, like 5-minute drive of that. Then you need to wait for the bus in the middle of the freeway. Then you're getting off the bus somewhere. Then you need to walk to the destination. It's not... freeways are really good for moving cars. They're awful for moving people on public transit. This is different from, let's say, an arterial road. And so if you have like these arterial roads that are very fast for and auto-oriented, these kind of stroads that Chuck Malone hates, the cars are going to go, they're not going to go at freeways, but they're going to go decently fast, but buses can also go decently fast, and because they're not freeways, there's going to be a lot of development next to them. In fact, why do freeways exist? You have this random freeway that undulates through South Central, and that is completely independent of the street grid. This was not built because people were deliberately trying to destroy South Central. This was not the... So there's something that people attribute to malice, because partly in New York it was the case, but it generally wasn't. So there's this book called The Big Roads. I'm forgetting the name of the author. So it's this one. It's by Earl Swift. He explains exactly the things that led to the construction of the urban freeways, including the parts where they destroyed neighborhoods. These were low income neighborhoods, including things that nowadays are quite chic. That was before they gentrified, or when they had just begun gentrifying. But they had low land values, and if you're a road builder in the 1940s and 50s, you think, oh yeah, it's a low Land Valley neighborhood, we were deliberately going to build through that because it's cheaper to acquire territory. But they're not trying to split neighborhoods. They didn't even know that the construction of the freeways would be bad for anyone. When they started doing community meetings, again, something that the book explains, when they started doing community meetings in the 50s and 60s, they actually expected people to want freeways near them, and they expected the meetings to mostly be people wanting a piece of the action, saying, oh, definitely build more roads in my area, not in this area. And they were actually shocked to encounter opposition. They weren't doing this because they liked destroying things. They did this because if you took the main arterials, so maybe this would be here western Vermont, farther west you might notice there are no good arterials. I mean, there's Sepulveda, but something that the blogger Let's Go LA noted is that West LA is very poor in north-south arterials. Like all of these are mostly 2 lanes in each direction. Like this one, Stars. I don't know, the Stars is very wide, but it's rather short because golf courses. You can turn this into an auto-oriented road. It's going to be faster door-to-door than a freeway-based system, actually. The problem is, so here you'd need to get rid of the golf courses, golf courses. But if you were to do it, in general, once you have a good arterial, this is what happens to arterials. Okay, can you see what happens to Wilshire here? That there are all these condos. You're not widening Wilshire. Okay, Wilshire is not getting widened. It's not because of environmental opposition. It's because if you widen Wilshire, then you're going to lose the sidewalks, which are important to the condos, and you then have to lose the condos. These condos are expensive. I mean, you're not taking them. You're not knocking them down. I mean, China is not knocking down things in the way of the maglev line in Shanghai, and LA. First of all, the United States has property rights. I mean, Americans overrate the extent to which American property rights are strong, but I mean, America is not China. It's a much wealthier country than China, so property values are just larger. This is never getting widened. And again, it's not because people don't like cars. It's because this is a development when you have an arterial. The upshot is that, yes, if you had a grid of streets that all looked like this, yes, cars would be fast and buses would be fast. You never have that. Cities accrete things over time, so yeah, the arterials fill up, and then it turns out to be cheaper to build a freeway 5 minutes away where you don't have this much development than along the arterials. That's how it goes. And the upshot is that you have these things that are really good for cars and really suck for everything else. They really suck for other modes of transportation. So the point is that you are not beating the car off-peak. You're not beating the car for things that don't involve total gridlock, which exists. I mean, there's total gridlock in LA at rush hour. Everyone knows this. I mean, there are tricks like commuting against traffic. Like, I think at this point there's so much commercial development on the west side, i.e. people, like rich people on the west side, didn't want to have to commute in traffic to downtown LA, so now there's tons of jobs on the west side. So I believe that at this point, on the 10, there's worse traffic in the morning going west and east. But that might be an LA specific thing. So the point is that you don't, so in the situation of LA as it is, you can't bus grid your way into it. Okay, a bus grid will not work. A bus grid, if it's really good, might get you from 5% to 6%. It's not going to be more than that. Okay, you're never getting that. I mean, you can spam frequency and it's not going to matter because at the distances people travel in LA, I mean, frequency is useful. Frequency is not everything. And that's going to be massively expensive. So I know that in Toronto, there's this presentation by Jonathan English from TransitCon that I don't know if it's online, where he explains it in the 1950s and 60s. Toronto formed the Toronto Transit Commission, which had the boundaries of what was then the Toronto metropolitan area, and has since become the municipality of Toronto. Toronto annexed the suburbs, but then there are suburbs beyond that are not served. And the point is that in the 50s and 60s, the buses went all the way up to Steeles Avenue, and that was at the time that was the end of the urban extent of Toronto. And the idea is that because they spanned a lot of frequency, this was useful. But this was the 1950s and 60s. At the time, there was very little job sprawl, so the buses got people to their downtown jobs. Also at the time, you didn't need to pay bus drivers as much as you do today, because it turns out that wages in the 2020s are higher than they were in the 1960s. And this means that it was just much cheaper to span a frequency of every 5 minutes on a bus. And so my point is that you're not bus gridding your way to turn. I mean, Toronto has a bus grid now. The bus grid works really well. But this is with a subway. This is with a city that's spent the last 6 years or 7 years trying, not perfectly well, but trying to become more transit oriented and actually decently succeeding at it. I mean, the model split in Toronto is in the 20s. I think it's 24. So yeah, this is downtown Toronto. I mean, downtown Toronto is likely larger than downtown LA. So yeah, the only way you're getting there is by subway or by commuter. Like, I mean, yes, you can drive, but look, how are you gonna drive? There's, I guess, this maybe is a freeway. This maybe is a parkway. I mean, the only real American grade freeway is this one, the 401. The 401 is far from downtown Toronto, and all of these are naturally gridlocked at rush hour. So yeah, you can do it in Toronto, but if you're trying to beat Toronto, you need to have been Toronto 60 years ago for a place. And by the way, in Toronto you have a strong downtown. You can try to look for jobs, for job data within radius of downtown Toronto, but it's very solid, as I recall. And in LA, what you're doing, or in Houston, what you need to do is to give people a reason to go downtown. Downtown is where people can plausibly take public transit. If it's on the same line, sure. I mean, if the Purple Line became the subway to the city, I'm sure people from Santa Monica would take it a couple stops to Century City. I mean, they would absolutely never take that to El Segundo, for example. And again, Century City is small, it's 50,000 jobs. Most people who work in not downtown LA don't work in Century City, but sure, you can get that. That's a byproduct of what happens when you have a good transit, a good rail transit network. And then maybe it's going to grow, and then maybe over time you can try to string another line there and grow it as a junction. But what you need is to start with a very solid downtown core. And this is what Calgary did. Calgary developed all these parking lots. This is what, for example, Nashville should be doing. Now in LA, can you kind of see that there are no big parking craters here? I mean, they exist, but again, LA is big, okay? So yeah, sure, there's parking here. There's even a building here that kind of expects another big building to abut it. But it's not like there's infinite space in downtown LA, because it turns out that a 2 square kilometer downtown is small for what a city the size of LA needs. So in LA, what you need is to grow downtown. And this has to be, for the most part, horizontal growth. So this means you take neighborhoods that are around downtown and turn them into an extension of downtown. This is not usually popular because people in a residential neighborhood tend to fiercely resist commercialization. Essentially, it means that other people are making a profit. Usually, it disrupts the sort of people who identify with the neighborhood. I mean, people who just live there because it's close to work don't care, but they're not the people who are running the show in neighborhood politics. So what you need is to make sure that, for example, let's say Little Tokyo, so this is around here, this needs to look like this. Now, freeways hurt you because freeways block the organic expansion. And you can kind of see that that you have skyscraper, 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 freeway, no skyscrapers. So this is a real limitation of having freeways in downtown, in the downtown. But note, on the side that doesn't have freeways, skyscraper, it's a skyscraper, 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 and then it's maybe more organic, the decrease in density, but by the time you hit the river, I mean, by the time you're hitting the rail yards in the river, I mean, it's not very well developed. Not, by the standards of something that's so close to downtown LA. So what you need is to grow the central business district. And I don't want to say that everything flows from that, but not flows from that, but this is really important. And I was asked in the original prompt, I was asked about Houston. So Houston is a city that I've never been to, which is why I'm trying to avoid commenting on it too much. And so Houston has more freeways because it was built more recently. And so there's a full ring outside the CBD, but you might notice that the skyscrapers don't fill that ring. Okay, you see, there are already, even in Houston, there are parking craters all over. And here, yeah, sure, with the skyscrapers, we see, like right amidst the skyscrapers, we see fewer parking craters, but they exist. And sure, you can fill in, but there's a limit of how much you can fill in, and you can maybe do a lot of development in near downtown areas. So on the way to the university here, forgetting which one it is. Is it University of Houston? No, this is Rice. Sorry. So this is Rice and Texas Medical Center. So you probably want to fill in between. So you want really high density around here and around here. So it means that you need to figure out how to densify so that more jobs are served by the existing light rail network. If you were to just look at the extent of the light rail network, in Houston it's somewhat small, and because of a complete snafu coming from the fact that they built the light rail lines in the wrong order. So after they built the actually really good Main Street line, instead of continuing to what was going to be the next strongest line, which was the university's line, it was supposed to go on the West Highway. But I may be wrong. It was supposed to go west at any rate, up through I think here, and then go up Midtown to, and go not Midtown. It's called Uptown. This area. So this second line got delayed essentially because they wanted to build to the north and east first. So it's northeast, and these lines really suck. It turns out. Which was known in advance, but so they decided they ran out of money and they're going to turn the university's line into BRT. So Houston is somewhat underbuilt, but Dallas isn't. Dallas is an enormous light rail network that nobody uses. So in Dallas's case, maybe they're thinking about more capacity downtown, but I mean the light rail network has a decent extent. It's just that so first of all, there's absolutely no TOD there, but there's no TOD in Calgary either. The thing that there is, though, is that it's much easier to walk to it or take a bus to it, and they're much more park and ride oriented in Texas, or really ever in America. So in America, when you build park and rides, the problem is nobody's gonna ever ride outside rush hour because you're forcing people to have a car, and you're building a station where the built area near the station has to be auto-friendly, so people are not going to, for example, go there for retail or socialization. So these gaming events that we're talking about before, they're not going to be near train stations where people can take the train. They're going to be based on the highway network. So in Dallas, the point is they have light rail. It's just through low density areas, and to a downtown that is not terribly strong for how enormous Dallas is. Dallas Fort Worth, the Metroplex, has 8 million people living in it. The metropolitan statistical area, so that's a slightly smaller version, is the number 4 metro area in America. It goes New York, LA, Chicago, and then Dallas. And if you do combined areas, sure, I mean, there's, I think, DC and San Francisco, and I think maybe then you get to Dallas. Dallas is enormous, and it has a downtown. I mean, it's not a tiny downtown or anything, but it's 300, 400,000 jobs in 100 square kilometers, and the 100 square kilometers are going to include a lot of things that are not meaningfully the city, or not meaningfully city center. So it's 300,000, maybe 400,000 jobs where, I can just do it with Dallas, that's Dallas County. Maybe I'm going to miss something near the airport, but I think the airport's too far. So the point is that in a place like Dallas or Houston, when you have a city center that is 1/5 the size of Paris, in a metropolitan area that is not that much smaller than Paris, nobody's gonna ride the train there. I mean, sure, the people who work there are gonna ride the train there, but so this is the peak job density in Dallas. The peak jobs per square mile, if you remember, this is about half the LA peak. If I just look at this peak area, it's gonna be tiny. So I don't want to do the draw polygon on that yet because I want to find a good 100 square kilometers, but I mean, it's not going to be big. I zoomed out too much. So you're asking about, yeah, a little Shinjuku, that would be cool. What are other strong Sunbelt core? Oh, hey, no. Sorry, I'm just seeing chat from the last couple of minutes because unlike New, I think New has 2 screens when she streams and I don't, so I need to constantly tab in and out. So let's see. This looks like a decent secondary center, so let's try to go there. We're gonna kill the layer because it's gonna create problems for us. So if we do this, maybe, because I don't have a sense of size, let's do this. And this is going to be either far too small or far too... Actually, no, it's too small. I don't want to do this because I'm going to lose. So draw a polygon, maybe grow it in this direction. Again, this ugly gerrymandering, which I'm not doing anywhere outside America. So the equivalent of, let's say, 20% of the jobs within 100 square kilometers in America. Okay, yeah, this is far too much. So what is this? 500,000. Remember, this is too much. We're going to need to cut one of the things. I'm guessing we're going to end up with 4K. But not 4K, 400K. Something like this, maybe. And note that in all of these cases, somehow city center is one pole of a thing. It's never in the actual center, which is different from what I'm doing in Paris. In Paris in La Défense, yes, it skews west. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't skew that much west. I mean, still the entire city. Okay, so this is, wait, how much? 41. Okay, so it's not 400, it's 480, and then we need to cut a little bit, so maybe it's 460-ish. Okay, so and remember, in Paris, the size in which downtown is not going to be in one corner, it's going to be right in the center, is going to be about 2.3 million. It's a completely different order of magnitude. And the result is that in Dallas, Yes, there's light rail, but very few people have. And remember, most of these are places that are very auto-oriented, because the 100th square kilometer in an auto-oriented city. No, I don't want to drop 20. So if we do just something that is vaguely downtown Dallas, and even that includes things that are not quite downtown. This is okay, 6 square miles, so that is 15-ish, 16 square kilometers. That's 200,000 jobs, which is not nothing, but I mean, in 15 square kilometers, I mean, there's way more than this in a European city. And remember, these are European cities, they don't have skyscrapers, or barely have skyscrapers. I mean, you do this in an Asian city, and that's, I mean, let me check how big Chiyoda is. I believe Chiyoda has 800,000 jobs. Chiyoda, Tokyo. So this is 11, okay. So they're not giving me a reference on this, although I think when I checked the reference it was actually correct. In 12 square kilometers, so this is somewhat smaller than this polygon, they have 850,000 jobs. Dallas has 220,000. The point is that you need to grow these downtown areas. Unfortunately, in Dallas itself, my understanding is that they actually have high office vacancy rates in downtown Dallas, to the point that it's easier to build residential. So it's this kind of weird thing where, first of all, I need to convince the lawyers to live near city center, because usually the law firms are the most prototypically city center type jobs, like them, finance, sometimes tech. Not always. I mean, in Silicon Valley it's not, but in San Francisco they're near city center. The only reason they're not in city centers because there's finance. In New York they're buying up in Midtown. In Boston it's in Kendall. It's Kendall Square, so the center of Cambridge, right outside downtown Boston. So the point is, you need those people to first of all live nearby, and then you're building them more jobs, and you creating is really slow, because the point is that some places are so horrifically auto-oriented that jobs here, people think, oh yeah, there's gridlock, and yes, I can ride the train, but who the hell wants to ride the train? The train kind of sucks. And again, so maybe in Dallas it's unusually difficult. I think Houston has a somewhat stronger city center. Maybe in Atlanta, you can visibly see kind of where the commercialization would go. Atlanta has a lot of commercialization on a north-south axis, but on an east-west one, 2 stops east and west of the center are 5 points. This is 2 stops east of 5 points. This is the land use. Parking. Mid-rise condos, not even high-rise. Field. I have no idea what this is, but it's parking. Cemetery. I think these are single-family houses, if not they're townhouses. More fields. And then you look 2 stops west, townhouses, field. Is this a field or is this parking? This doesn't even look like an active park. It just looks undeveloped. Parking also. Strike parking. Townhouses, lots of parking. Empty lots, single family. Like, this is not the sort of development. I mean, we talk about TOD a lot, but a lot of what it is, so first of all, a lot of what it is commercialization, so actually growing the city center of Atlanta in this direction, maybe, or just making it, so I think these are actually single family zoned areas, and it's not just that these are undesirable or something. but again, Calgary is single family. I mean, should Calgary stay single family zoned? No. Um, but remember, Calgary is 16%, is 15-ish%. Atlanta is, I think, 3% or 4%. The trip to work transit model split. So a lot of what you really need is to give people a reason to be where the trains go. And traffic in Atlanta specifically is goddamn awful. Okay, so this is specific to Georgia. So unlike in Texas, so in Texas, Dallas and Houston vote a lot farther left than the rest of the state. This is also true in Georgia. The difference is in Georgia this was also true decades ago, because Atlanta is black. I don't remember the proportion of the population of Atlanta that is black, but I think for a while the city proper had a majority. It might still have one, if not, it's a very large black minority. So there's a lot of state animosity. It's kind of white South animosity toward the black city that even predates the racial realignment of the parties. So even when it was white Democrats, they hated the black city, which did not happen in Texas. I mean, in Texas, yes, Houston and Dallas are a lot more diverse than the rest of the state, but I think it's much more recent diversity. There was never, I mean, they're diverse in the sense of having everyone, kind of like New York. So it was less threatening, and I know that Texas had Jim Crow, but Texas also had a much more, I think, black population than Georgia. So the point is that there's such toxic state politics in Georgia that first of all, MARTA, so the transit network, doesn't receive state subsidies. I think it's the only major system in America, the only major subway in America that doesn't receive state subsidies. It all has to be local. And also the freeways. These are the freeways of Atlanta. It may not be very obvious on Google Earth, but you have one north-south freeway. Yes, it has a branch, but you have one north-south freeway trunk, one east-west. This is what Atlanta has to deal with. This is a metropolitan area of 7 million people with universal car ownership if you're not desperately poor. Remember, the transit model split in metropolitan Atlanta is about 3% or 4%. This is what it has to deal with. These are the freeways it has to deal with. I believe that I-75 is actually the number 2 freeway in America in traffic density after the 405 in LA. And LA is a lot bigger, and there are other auto-oriented cities in America that are Atlanta scale or more. So it has an underbuilt freeway network because the state loathes the city. Which does not happen in Texas. Yes, in Texas the state is very Republican. Yes, the cities are not. But this is a recent development. Even now, Donald Trump won the combined statistical areas of both Houston and Dallas, I believe. I think he lost the smaller metropolitan statistical areas, but won with like the wider CSAs. Whereas Biden actually won metropolitan Atlanta. This also happened in 2008, so Obama barely won Metro Atlanta and lost Metro, CSA, Metro Houston and Dallas by a couple percent. Of course, Obama in 2008 won a bigger proportion of the national vote than Biden. My point is that this kind of toxic politics doesn't exist. I mean, look at Houston. Houston is a metropolitan area slightly larger than Atlanta. Look at how many more freeways it has. So my point is that Atlanta is gridlocked to hell. And if there's kind of a synergy in which they at the same time build better or run better service and also do commercialization, so expand the CBD, then more people would ride. It's just, it involves a commitment. A commitment, and again, it's not going to come from the state because the state loathes the city. It's a commitment that might come from the city itself. I don't know, maybe from the county. I'm not sure. But my point is that what you need is commercialization. So I was asked how transit could help make a growing auto-oriented city less auto-oriented. And the example in the prompt again was Houston, which I'm steering clear of, mostly because I'm just far less familiar with it than I am with, let's say, LA. What you need is to use the transit as a backbone of commercialization. This happened in Calgary. In Calgary, they had a city center that was decently strong because the proportion of people working in city center used to be larger, because job sprawl is a relatively recent trend, let's say last 60-ish years, and it's intensifying, even in places where you would not expect it. And if you go to the Hubbound report, it's called Hubbound Travel New York. So if you go here, they have an archive. Let's say if you need to get the archive to go to something more historic. Yeah, so if you go to the Hubbound, so my point is that you had more people entering the Manhattan core, for example, by subway in the 1980s than you do today. I believe the peak was 1988 or 1989, and the subway ridership has risen since then by almost double, I think. So I think it dipped just below 1 billion and peaked before the great slowdowns of 2015-16. I think it peaked in 14 or 15 at, I want to say, 1.7. So over 7 billion a year. And peak ridership to Manhattan never recovered to the 1980s, and I believe that it was even higher in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So job sprawl is a recent thing, and essentially what you do is, so what Calgary did is, because they redeveloped these parking lots and built the C-train at the same time, they essentially told people, okay, yeah, there's not going to be much parking available in downtown, but it's okay, you get a train instead. That's fine. And they kind of got used to it, so this was easier for Calgary. In LA, it's different. In LA, it's not so much conservation. But remember, in LA, modal splits were increasing in the 90s and the 2000s. It's not just they never declined or something. They did, and then they recovered to some extent. Same as Vancouver. And in LA, they never recovered. LA's modal split is below 1980s levels. They've built all these rail lines, but they never had the same process where maybe there's not enough coverage, I don't know, maybe they neglected commercial TOD, maybe at this scale there needs to also be residential TOD, I'm not certain. But the point is that a city of this scale, what it needs is commercialization. What it needs is a bigger, monocentric downtown for people to go to. People talk a lot about polycentricity. Polycentricity is not for a city with this rail network, okay? Rail network, we can literally identify the lines and they just don't intersect very much except in city center. Like, you want to talk about polycentricity, let me show you Berlin for a moment, okay? When we talk about Berlin is incredibly polycentric. And I don't mean because Europe is, I mean Berlin specifically is polycentric. This is the railway network in Berlin. So yes, you have this center, it's Alexanderplatz, you have Potsdamer Platz, you have the zoo area. This was the City West Center during division. This was the central business district of West Berlin, Alexanderplatz of East Berlin, Potsdamer Platz and Brandenburger Tor, that was the city center of the unified city before the war. They've tried to rebuild that as city center, and also a lot of people who don't have, I want to say that a lot of foreign tech people are maybe more Alexanderplatz centric, or maybe Gesundbrunnen or Neukölln or Kreuzberg and Neukölln, mostly because I shouldn't say we came to the city without like West German prejudices against, for example, immigrants in Gesundbrunnen and Neukölln or Easterners in Mitte. So we went where it's cheap, I guess. Like we oriented ourselves around the part of the city center. So again, we have this. There's a lot of jobs. I think there are a lot of tech jobs in Fraserstown at this point. I think Amazon wants to build a tower, like a tower somewhere here maybe. I'm forgetting where. And all of these are junctions of railroads. Okay, like Gesundbrunnen has high-speed trains. Okay, Gesundbrunnen is a high-speed rail station. And so yeah, I mean, you can see commercialization all over the inner parts of the city. And yes, sure, there are courtyards, but this is actually this is not missing middle. These are mid-rises. These buildings have 6 floors. Sometimes more. This, for example. And I mean, this is an area that I'm very familiar with. I would walk there a lot. I used to live in this area. These are not purely residential. There are jobs here. I mean, there's a space somewhere around here that's literally called Unicorn, because a lot of tech people in Berlin pretend that they live in San Francisco. And so this is polycentricity. And yes, this works really well with public transit because these are really strong centers. Okay, I mean, there's tons. I mean, I can take photos from Alexanderplatz if people don't believe me. This is a really big city center. So, I think this is the point that I was going to make. I'm going to take questions, and I'm going to turn on lights right now because I was relying on natural light because it's summertime right now, it's daylight saving, but 8 in the evening is kind of dark. But I'm going to look at chat in a sec for questions. I take my I'm not a real streamer ethos very seriously, so I don't, for example, preset my lighting yet. What did I say Houston was a good example of? Houston is a good example of a growing city that is auto-oriented. LA is not growing. LA has really slow housing growth. You can actually check this because, so this is a really cool website, HUD user, that is not perfect. It sometimes has errors, but for the most part it's correct. So let's look how many housing units are being permitted. And it's lagging, but it's pre-corona, so we don't care. How many new housing units have been permitted in LA County, which is a county of 10 million people. So, in a county of 10 million people, in the early years of the 2010s, you had only about 10,000-ish housing units approved every year, so that's 1 in 1,000, 1 per 1,000 people. And this accelerated as the economy recovered to a little more than 2 units per 1,000 people. Now, if you think 2 is a lot, let me just point out that in Berlin, which is a city of 3-point-something million, which is not particularly wealthy, we average 5-point-something. In Paris, they average, I believe, 7-point-something. Not in the city proper, unfortunately, but in the Paris region. The Paris region has 12 million people. Let me check this. Yona. So it's a paper by Yona, who's amazing, and you should all follow him. Yona. So you can kind of see the links to his upzoning papers. He has this paper that was cited a lot by NIMBYs that shows that in a specific case of upzoning in Chicago, the upzoning did not actually lead to more development. So Ile-de-France, maybe I should say development or upzoning. Yeah, no, this is the paper. Strongly recommended. So he talks about the way that about what happened, and I think there's a graph there that I'm going to try to scroll to. Housing unit put into, so this is construction starts. Note that on the eve of Corona, the Paris region, which has 12 million people, builds more than 80,000 a year. So that's about 7 in 1,000. And LA, which is almost that big, the county is 10 million, builds 1/4 what Paris built. So LA builds very little. It is not a fast-growing region. However, the reason it is not fast-growing is because it is shockingly NIMBY. LA is the most NIMBY part of California. If you're familiar at all with YIMBY discourse, there was something called SB50. There's this representative in San Francisco named Scott Wiener, who came in through, I believe, gay community activism, who has weird ideas like actually passing laws through the state legislature, and sometimes, for example, he wears the gay community activist hat, so he passes laws. At this point, it's not about gay rights, because the state of gay rights in California is pretty good. It's mostly, I think, at this point about trans and non-binary rights, and he openly says, I mean, I know when growing up gay that it was different, and now I see trans people the same, and I want them to have equal rights and so on. But this also includes housing. He's very YIMBY. He's kind of like the YIMBY representative. And he has this law that is called SB50 that would essentially force cities to upzone up to, I believe, 4 floors near public transit. So that would be within a certain distance of either a frequent bus or a train station. And that law failed. And it failed because of LA. Let me see if I can find SB50 map, maybe. Or SB50, not impact, I don't want to vote, maybe. Okay, so this is a map that is of uncertain provenance. Oh, okay, it's from Legal Pad, yeah, so it's gonna be fine. So they're first of all saying if it was a Democrat or a Republican, but the point is that the SB50, which was state law, so they say by senators representing affluent suburbs, which is also correct, but where the hell is the map? I was promised a map. I clicked for a map. So this is by Ethan Alkin, who's amazing. But anyway, I can't find. Okay, but anyway, let me just. No, I don't want to click this. I want to find them. So the point is, on this map, the yesas, so that's a greenish color, were almost entirely Northern California and to some extent San Diego. And then LA was full of no's and people who were absent. The blues, I think, is present or people who were absent. Or either absent or people who abstained, or maybe both. And I think light colors, Democrat, dark colors, Republican. So it's kind of inland, like off the coast, it's more Republican. And here it's green for yes, I guess red for no, yellow for present or for absent. Like, so again, present means abstain from present. And you can kind of say that LA was mostly anti. Northern California is different, so it sounds like it would be Scott Wiener. Other NorCal people mostly voted yeah as well, and then the nays are in LA. LA is incredibly NIMBY. Remember how I said at the beginning when I was blabbering about the lack of a mass upper middle class in Hollywood the way there is in New York finance or San Francisco tech. I suspect that this is related because this mass upper middle class is kind of the base of YIMBY. So you see and I mean, I know who goes to, I think it's called Abundant Housing LA, the YIMBY people in LA. It's engineers, tech workers, lawyers, and so on. So kind of people with like a weak local identity and a strong either national or macro-regional identity. So macro-region would be all of LA or all of SoCal rather than even one specific part of LA. And that's a huge thing in San Francisco. It's I think at one point Sonia, I think when Sonia Tarras was running for the Board of Supervisors, that would be the City Council of San Francisco, when she ran for that, which was I think 2018. Yeah, it was 2018. She said that she checked, and apparently the median voter had moved to the district, to her district in Soma, I think in 2011 or something like that. So lots of turnover, and LA, I guess, has less of that. So the point is that LA is just very NIMBY, so it builds no housing. Somewhat less than New York, less than San Francisco, far less than places that actually build housing. Paris, or even more so, let's say Tokyo, Seoul. But the point is that LA could build more if it wanted to. So LA doesn't do any TOD and also doesn't do sprawl. Houston and Dallas don't do any TOD, they instead do sprawl. But the principles are actually pretty similar for how they could do better TOD. Yes, in LA it mostly is about legalizing it, and in Houston it's to a large extent already legal. They just need to figure out ways to make it pencil out. But the fact that you need commercialization is really important. And unfortunately, by the way, California EMB is not very good at this, or not very interested in this. They talk more about residential upzoning than commercial. Okay, now I'm going to take other questions. Okay, so I'm going to skip Borner, not because I don't like you. I'm going to answer your question, but because we're on SB 50. So how do you pronounce your name? Is it Nim? So you're asking if SB 50 would have discouraged future transit expansion? I don't know. I will say that I know for a fact that there is NIMBYism in Vancouver regarding subway expansion, precisely because there's no SB 50 in Vancouver, but precisely because it is expected that it will lead to future upzoning, because it did in the past. They upzoned the hell out of the Expo line, and if I zoom in, you can literally see, maybe this is a bad, even this is a good example. I mean, this is not particularly dense, but this is not even a townhouse, this is mid-rise. And here we have towers, I mean, yes, towers and parks, but towers next to the train station, which is randomly selected and is not even in Vancouver, it's in Burnaby. This is Metro Town. I imagine probably Centricity. This is the second center. This is the second center, I would say, of Metro Vancouver, alongside the greater downtown Vancouver area. I used to go game around Edmonds. This was the place where the host of the game night was a very lovely person who believes that George Zimmerman did nothing wrong. But the place was more central than the other place. So this is the land use near Edmonds. Again, towers and parks, but towers. And you might notice that there are no parking graders. I mean, there's some parking, but I mean, less than in the literal downtown of an American Sunbelt city. And far from the train station, it's much lower density. And likewise here in New Westminster, they built shopping centers and some commercial towers, some residential, right at the same time as they built SkyTrain in the 80s. So it is expected in Vancouver, even without a law explicitly saying so, that SkyTrain expansion leads to upzoning. This happened again, most completely on the Expo line, but also to some extent here on the Millennium line. It's the one that goes east and has this really weird circular thing. And this happened later on the Canada line, it's the one that goes north-south. So on the Millennium Line extension that is currently being built through, not to UBC because the construction costs doubled in the last 10 years, but halfway to Arbutus. It is expected there will be upzoning, and yes, people are pissed, and people are especially pissed in this area. But the reason it's not being extended to this area is not because they're against it, it's because there's no money. There was a referendum on this, on giving the transit agency more money to build things. I'm forgetting when, I think 2016, 17. It failed, but it failed because people did not trust the agency to spend money, because the referendum came just after there was a big shit show of a new smart card whose rollout was botched, very delayed, over budget as well, very unnecessary, just a cubic bullshit. But because of that, people did not trust the agency, and in the polls before the election, when people asked, "Why are you voting yes?" people said, "Okay, I want more transit, whatever." And when they asked, "Were you voting no?" The people said no. The biggest reason is, "I don't trust the agency." So the reason they're not getting a subway is just money, but when money becomes available soon, they will get the subway whether they like it or not. So I'm not worried that people will oppose subways if there's an SB50 type law. I mean, NIMBY's gonna NIMBY. LA has NIMBYs even without SB50. Things are being built over NIMBY objections. People overestimate the influence of NIMBYs. Okay, so now I'm gonna go back to Borner. Does LA fit into the problems of a grid versus radial subway system shape? Okay, so I don't want to spend hours. I'm going to try to explain this in minutes. The correct way to build a subway is to be radial. I think the most, I'm trying to think what the perfect radial is. Maybe Moscow. Moscow has some misconnections, so lines that cross without a transfer. And I'm not sure that Moscow okay, so in Moscow you might be able to, no, Moscow's not even seeing, Moscow's not even showing this to me on Google Earth, unfortunately. But the point is that in Moscow you have a circle and a bunch of diameters through it that go far out into suburban parts of the city, serving a city center that was supposed to be monocentric. This is the correct way to build a subway. There are systems that don't do that, like Berlin or Paris. In Berlin, there are parallel lines, U8 and U6 run parallel. It's vaguely a grid, because you have, let's say, east-west line here, then you have the Stadtbahn that goes east-west, and you have U5 that goes east-west, and they intersect, but there's no real idea, but there's no sense of like trying to cleanly branch out to maximize coverage. That's what the S-Bahn is for. Because it's trying to serve a bunch of different centers, you even have two lines, namely U7, which is, I can explain Berlin much more easily if I, if we do this. In Berlin, the point is that they were trying to serve multiple centers, because, for example, you have two lines which are called U7 and U9, and I will show them on. Is this just not loading? Okay, it is not. Okay, so U7, which is light blue, this part of it opened as a branch of U6, so that's the north, south, and purple. But most of the line, but then during division, they turned it from they turned this line from a right, and they clicked and double clicked multiple times. So it's gonna try opening multiple times. It's just taking time. Okay. U7 is the light blue line that you see kind of slalom, because it was turned from a Mitte serving branch of U6 during division into a full trunk serving West Berlin, and likewise U9 opened completely bypassing Mitte, connecting Wedding here and Gesundbrunnen, which were northern periphery of West Berlin, with the center of West Berlin here, and then also some wealthy areas that were only connected by S-Bahn to Mitte. So this is kind of a gritty system, not gritty like a very gritty city or like the Philadelphia mascot, but gritty. But that's not really the issue in LA. Yes, LA kind of wants a grid, but the problem in LA is not they are doing a grid rather than a radial. The problem in LA is that, first of all, they have a tiny system for how big of a city it is, because their construction costs are horrific. And they can't even concentrate lines where they would work, because there's a 2/3 majority required for raising taxes in a referendum. So they try to give goodies to every region, So instead of saving money, the 2/3 majority requirement leads to more waste. So the result is that they have an underbuilt network, especially in city center. And that's the main problem in LA. Okay, TBM versus cut and cover. So in LA, honestly, you have really wide streets for cut and cover, but I mean, especially Vermont, south of. This is not gauge, right? I mean, no, it widens here. Over here, I mean, this is a wide enough street that you can just cut and cover it. And yes, traffic will suck. So what? Okay, I mean, it's a wide street. You need to shut most of it, not all of it. And it's okay. It's a wide street. The cars have the freeway anywhere. Anyway, the buses are going to be able to go on Western instead. Also, buses in LA suck anyway. But the point is that beyond a certain street, I believe gauge, that I can't actually find on a map, but I know, but I'm either, let me check Vermont and gauge. Yeah, it's farther south than HI. Here. This is an incredibly wide road. Don't do a TBM here, for God's sake. Either go elevated, yes, it means losing the trees, or build cut and cover. But again, this is just an artifact of having really wide roads, and yes, you can cut construction costs this way. But most of the rest of the system would need to be bored, because LA has wide streets, but not all of the streets happen to be this absurdly wide. How many lanes is this? I mean, this looks like wider than where I live in Paris. No, it's not, but I mean, 53 meters? Yeah. But again, this is specific to South Vermont. Okay, what about capping? Capping is useful, but remember, capping is useful, but remember that even in the direction where it's not capped, the job density falls off fast. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's historic preservation, I don't know if it's NIMBYism, I don't know if it's just that there's a lot of demand on the subway, but there's not a lot of demand a kilometer from the subway. I don't know. But the point is that by the time you hit Little Tokyo, look at this. I'm sure these people are gonna say, oh, it's gonna preserve our charm not to be skyscrapers, but no. This is not charming. Parking. Oh yeah, thanks for, wait, is this the correct link? Because I'm saying 2 A's in peak transit. I don't know if actually did that or... Oh, she actually did do peak transit with 2 A's, okay. Because she used to be peak transit with 1, yeah, you see it's peak transit with 1 A. Yep. I love him. Okay, is LA's current subway approach a waste of time? I don't know. Like a waste of time, a waste of money? I don't know. It depends on construction costs. At current construction costs, there's a lot of waste. I know they're making serious effort to reduce construction costs. They had this paper about various causes and things that they might do to do better in the future. And again, I don't know exactly what they're going to do. I mean, I know what I've told them. I mean, what I've told them was also based on my knowledge of 6 months ago or 3 months ago, which is not the same as my knowledge today. But so things like, for example, not overbuilding the stations, things like using cut and cover better, things like not awarding contracts to people who keep screwing them over with change orders. So at low construction costs, you can get away with a lot of ridiculous lines. I mean, Madrid has ridiculous lines that are not really low, but decently low cost per rider, just because they can afford them because their cost per kilometer are so absurdly low. And about building more housing. I mean, so here's the problem. Even the wheelchair subway, the cost per rider is awful. It's just that there's hope that in the future there will be upzoning, even if SB50 keeps failing, that eventually something will happen. And I don't know if it will. I mean, again, my presumption is that it's based on a kind of mass upper middle class, like mass middle class employment, which doesn't really, again, I don't think it really exists in LA. There's manufacturing, which is mass working class. And I think that's not actually getting better. I think if that's in decline, just maybe a slower decline than the Rust Belt. There's Hollywood, where you have the stars, and then you have a mass working class, and then maybe the mass working class is like the better off parts of the working class, like like building trades and such, for building sets or for doing costume design, but that's not mass middle class. These are people, so I knew a few of these people from gaming in Vancouver, because Vancouver used to be Hollywood North, and at this point I think it's increasingly San Francisco North. And in the Hollywood North area, so for example, one of the people specifically went to a trade school to learn how to manufacture costuming for films. So again, so this is a very solid, skilled working class job. Might even scratch the intermediate job category. This is not what I think of as middle class. So degree office work, law, medicine, engineering, academia, things like that. Finance. And so again, maybe LA will have it, because I know that, I mean, isn't Tesla headquartered in LA? I mean, I know that Hyperloop 1 is in LA. Maybe something will come of that, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a big city, and that's a very small minority of it. But the problem is that when the only sources of wealth come from either home ownership or people who are just fabulously wealthy from, let's say, acting, that's not really gonna. I mean, if the wealthy people are the gentry, people want to be gentry. EMB is not a movement about the gentry. EMB is a movement for working wealth. So again, this is just maybe my speculation for why it hasn't caught up in LA as much, but it is truth that it has not caught up in LA. It is not caught in LA as much as in San Francisco or Seattle or San Diego. Again, maybe it'll change. I mean, San Francisco. I mean, California builds less housing than it did previously. I mean, it's not like EMB is successful. In San Francisco, you sometimes find a few points of light, but San Francisco does build more than LA. But again, maybe LA will build more. We don't know. I mean, it's possible. So, okay, finally, what do I think about Vienna's public transit? The answer is that I don't think about Vienna's public transit because I've never been there. Now, I know that the ridership on the Vienna U-Bahn is fucking amazing. Okay, I think I mean, the problem is identifying metro areas in the German-speaking world is really difficult because cities have sharp boundaries, and then you have suburbs beyond them. It is also somewhat of a problem in identifying what the London commuter belt is. Whereas in, let's say, the US or in France or in, I've seen Asia, you have contiguous urban sprawl. So you see in Vienna, like, this is what the border of Vienna with the rest of Austria looks like. Let me see if I can actually. You can even see that it's farmland. There's farmland at the boundary of Vienna. People commute. Don't get me wrong, but it's difficult to figure out what exactly is the size of the Vienna built-up area, of the metropolitan area. So it's hard to find what the denominator of this is, the population. But the ridership is amazing. If you pretend it's just in the city, I think it might even be better per capita than Tokyo. I think the modal split. I know what the modal split is. This is, by the way, how I find old things for my blog. In case you're wondering, I literally have to just Google. Yeah, this is the total rail ridership in Vienna. Yes, I'm saying the metro area is 3.7, but that is with the entirety of Lower Austria, which mostly does not identify as even part of the Vienna region. Like, I don't think someone in, let's say, St. Pölten thinks of themselves as a Vienna suburbanite, the way someone in Long Island on Long Island thinks of themselves as New York suburbanite. So even with this ridiculously large thing, you have a modal split of 40. I think in Austria, I think in Vienna proper, the modal split is 50%. Yes, this is right. It's a link to a Twitter tweetstorm has an internal link. Vienna's so I know what the modal split in Vienna is, and it's fucking amazing. It's not perfect. One of the people that I game with lives in Vienna and complains that they have to drive there where the U-Bahn is just not good enough. They're a student. So I would expect that university students would be good with public transit, but apparently for that person's needs, it isn't. But again, I don't know. I mean, I've been to Vienna, but it was with parents, and it was 17 years ago, and I don't remember any of it. And we didn't use the subway. So I can't really tell you what I think about the Vienna metro network, because I don't know it very well. I know that Vienna is unusually metro heavy and S-Bahn light historically, but by German-speaking standards. But they're also S-Bahnifying. And I think actually the new Vienna Hauptbahnhof station is new, like the Berlin one, maybe. But again, I don't know this very well. I don't know it nearly as well as I know Berlin. Did the Thompson Line blog that you sent me on Twitter have useful? Yeah, it had some useful info. I mean, the problem is, like, it's not, like, I don't know to what extent it tells me exactly why it cost a lot. Because, I mean, I've seen a breakdown of costs on the Thompson Line to some extent, and that mostly confirms that the stations are very expensive. But it doesn't explain why. I don't know what's really going on there. I can speculate, but I don't know. Oh, finally, Nord, you have this question about Australian cities versus Canada. So the modal splits in Australia are pretty similar to Canada. Sydney is better. So people keep saying that Canada is better than Australia. I don't think it is. I mean, the public transport trips per capita are higher in Canada, but I think it's just bus-to-bus transfers and bus-to-train transfers. The modal split in Sydney is slightly better than in Toronto and Montreal. In the secondary cities, not that Melbourne is very secondary, I think Melbourne is in the high teens. So it doesn't seem terribly different. They seem to have similar problems of really high construction costs. Australia, the big difference is that Australia has really good S-Bahns, and I think only literally opened subways a few years ago, like maybe 2 years ago or something like that in Sydney, and maybe in Melbourne they even haven't yet. But again, I don't know Australia well at all. The ridership are only metro, tram, and bus. So these numbers include the S-Bahn because I literally have a link, which we're gonna find out if it still is available. Okay, thank you. You did not link rot. Sometimes when you use the internet, you have you're thankful for very small things, in the same way that sometimes when you're thankful that your Minister of Health didn't personally give you corona, you're thankful that a link from a few years ago still is valid. So yes, this is very little of this is S-Bahn, but I did include the S-Bahn and I did exclude the buses. The reason I'm excluding buses is that I'm trying to avoid transfer artifacts, and when I started doing this, I was not thinking about cities that are very multimodal. Like I was thinking about New York, where if you're on the bus, it's very likely you're transferring to the subway. So I just looked at subway or equivalent, and this included a streetcar system. So I'm mostly adding these up, and yes, I know I'm having certain transfer artifacts in there, but but again, I'm including S-Bahn, which no, is very weak. It's 80 million a year in Berlin. I think the Berlin S-Bahn has more riders than the Berlin U-Bahn. And if not, or maybe it's wrong, but the Berlin S-Bahn is very close. What are they saying? 478 million a year. So more people ride the Berlin S-Bahn than the Vienna U-Bahn. And the U-Bahn, I think actually the U-Bahn is more than this. This is 478. And the U-Bahn, the U-Bahn, yeah, it's higher, it's 553. But the point is that Vienna has only recently expanded its mainline rail, but I'm including it. And yes, this is stuff that's in the city, not in the suburbs. The suburbs are different. I think that the suburbs have had a kind of an anti-city identity going back to the 1920s, because the city was run by the Social Democrats, and when you're saying the model split in Vienna is 39%, I think that's all trips. Work trips are generally higher because all trips include me walking to the supermarket, which I don't think of as a trip because it's a very short trip. Did I say most people riding NYC buses connect with the subway? I think so. I think that is the case. My main piece of evidence for this is rather circumstantial, but I think in this case it's solid. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna look at. For some reason it's zoned out. Let's look at fare revenue. They're telling me annual trips. Heavy rail is 3.5 billion fare revenue. This is annual on link trips. Now I know the number of link trips on the subway because that's the headline thing published by the MTA. It's about 1.6 something in 2018. So it's a little more than $2 per. Again, don't look at this number. Look at the. Look at the headline number. I don't want your head. No, it's gonna be Corona. It's gonna be mid-Corona. I don't want Corona. I also don't want Corona, but you know what I meant. Okay, this is for 2017. Good enough. 1.7 something. So this is about $2 per actual trip, because obviously if you're connecting within the system, that doesn't even count as a transfer for MetroCard purposes. And now bus is 800 million-ish over 700 million trips. So the only reason you're getting this low, which is going to be about $1.20, and I know what the fare is in New York. It's I think $2.75, so it's $2.75. Yes, you can get a monthly. I think the monthly is 120 something. The only way you're getting from that to $1.20 per trip is with massive transfer volumes. And I also know from a study, to be fair, from the 90s, that there's very little bus-to-bus transfer volume in New York City. There's a site in our Brooklyn bus redesign report. I believe 3% of trips it's either 3% or 11%, but either way it's too small to produce this pattern, are bus-to-bus transfers. So it has to be massive amounts of transferring with the subway, because we know that there are free transfers, so the fare revenue will probably be allocated some way to take that into account. I don't know if they're just assuming it's a subway trip or if it's the first one that people ride. Isn't like every NYC bus going to do a subway station? Not every, but pretty close to it, yeah. Okay, finally, you're asking me about land use in Cleveland. Okay, so as I said, this is about growing cities, and Cleveland Um, not a growing city. And this is not like in LA where it's not growing because there's NIMBYism. In Cleveland, it's not growing because the city's economy is terrible. I mean, I know from people who live there that the house, I mean, so in LA, I know from people who live there that the housing prices are insane, maybe even worse than what they've had to pay in New York. In Cleveland, so there's this transit blogger and author who was for years, I don't know if she's still there, but for years she was at Streets Blog, Angie Schmidt, who at one point was complaining that the value of the house that she has in Cleveland is so low that a bank wouldn't even give her a mortgage forget for the house, which you could just pay cash for. It wouldn't even let her mortgage the house if she wanted a loan to do some renovation work, because the house was worth low 5 figures. And I know that, and another transit Twitter person, their name is Alex Baca, used to live in Cleveland and owned a house and probably was spending comparable amount of time money. So probably the value of a house in Cleveland is lower than what a middle class person in a middle class neighborhood of LA has to pay every year. So the point is, so for Cleveland you need something different than commercialization. Sorry, different from commercialization, because you can't rely on TOD to save you, because there's not a lot of development pressure. I can do another stream of that if people want. I will pull it, but again, it's a different thing. Okay, and final thing, you're asking me if Seattle's plan is okay and what could they do better. What could they do better is build things at the cost that they built at literally 5 years ago. U-Link was $350 million per kilometer underground. There's this link that you can see here. Let me find that here. So this is U-Link. This literally opened 2016. It's not ancient history. Remember 2016, David Bowie's still alive. Everyone thought Donald Trump was never going to win the election. 344. This is a line that is, of note, 32% underground. The rest is a combo of light rail and above ground. And yeah, it's for construction a while from now, but it's not inflation. Okay, and the inflation rate expected in the next 10 years is not enough to turn this into something semi-reasonable. This is 650. This might actually be the most expensive. No, it's not the most expensive thing here that is not predominantly underground. But I think there's this really complex thing in Shanghai. It's really short line. It's this incredibly complex junction that's more expensive. By the way, this is. I mean, the majority of our database by length, or almost the majority, is China. Yeah, so it's the Line 1 Western Extension. This is a really complex thing. Is elevated and is more expensive. And maybe there's some. Yeah, maybe in Hong Kong they have something that. Yeah, in Hong Kong there's the Tiananmen South Extension, because the Hong Kong costs are insane, and this is also complex to some extent. But anyway, let's not pretend there's a reason for this. Hong Kong is just super expensive to build it. And so, like, this is the company that this is in. It's lines that I'm literally using recurrently as examples to convince people that these places are not as competent as they think. So this is how bad West Seattle and Ballard is. It's 650, and for a fully underground line in its database, the median is 250. So what Seattle needs is to reduce its construction costs. It needs to build things at costs that are not going to get European politicians literally spit it on the street. Never mind yelled at in the media, never mind fired. That's going to happen at a lot less than $649.5 million a kilometer for a predominantly above ground line. I mean, this is after they're going to get called in for parliamentary inquiries and probably lose their jobs. And probably if a politician is batted for it, they're going to lose re-election. It's possible that after this, they're also going to get spitted at on the street. In Italy, people got put into prison for. I don't remember if we have all of the Italian data here, or if we. No, we don't. We don't have the line 3 in Milan, unfortunately. But in Milan, in Italy, for things that like were 300, not section T3, which is in a very complex part of the historic center of Rome, but things that are not complex, that were 300 or 400. I mean, politicians were literally put in jail for them. So maybe get your construction costs to levels that are not going to embarrass the entire world. Oh, no, not in England and Ireland. No, but I mean, in London, their construction costs are insane. But in London, that's roughly what it costs to build a fully underground extension. In Seattle, it's a 1/3 underground extension. Yeah, I'm gonna poll it on Patreon because I try to do what the Patreon backers want from time to time. Okay, so I have a question about my crayon. Yeah, I drew kind of a T-bone structure, but my old crayon had a triangle structure. Was there a reason for the change? I keep going back and forth on what to do with this. I think there was even a time in which I backed the original T-bone, so the original Texas. Let me see if I can find the original Texas T-bone. Texas T-bone. This is archaeology that we're talking about here. Okay, for some reason it got sent to Amazon, which. Okay. Maybe it's this one. But I imagine that it's all dead now, right? Because Texas Central has replaced it. Okay, this is some random app that I don't even know who made it. Okay, yeah, all of this is basically dead because I guess Texas Central is overtaken, but the idea of the Texas T-bone for the uninitiated, it was that there was going to be a T-style alignment where we would go from Dallas along the I-35 corridor, and because these people didn't know what they were talking about, I think they instead of serving downtown Dallas, they wanted to serve the airport for some reason, so from DFW through I-35, Waco, Temple, Austin, and San Antonio, and then Houston would have would be kind of the other part of the T, going from Houston through College Station to Temple. They were even trying to I think people explained that this was a good idea because there was a turntable in Temple, as if you would ever use this for any kind of high-speed running. Can you see the curves? Do you think a high-speed train goes at high speed on these curves? I mean, I guess you can make every train stop at Temple, but not the largest center. Sorry, soldiers who are stationed at Fortet. This so SNCF kind of went with it with its proposals and started by proposing Dallas to San Antonio. I think it wisely moved from just serving the airport to doing Fort Worth Airport, Dallas, and then from Dallas to down I-35, and then Houston is the second phase. But then people realized, wait a sec, Houston is big, Austin and San Antonio aren't. Temple is, by the standards of all of these, insignificant, so let's do just Dallas to Houston. And then it became kind of and then this is why thinking of a reverse T, where you have San Antonio, Austin, then hitting. You can do that. I mean, the problem is that the triangle, I mean, you can kind of see with the freeway triangle, the triangle doesn't actually hit Austin. And that's an oversight. Austin is a big and very fast growing city. It's almost as big as San Antonio. So you definitely want to, if it's a triangle, not have it follow I-10. You wanted to do something like Houston to Austin, then to San Antonio, and if you're doing that, you might as well go a little more and just forget the entire Dallas to San Antonio leg. The Virgin Texas Triangle versus the Chad Texas T-bone. I swear about these Virgin Chad memes that I'm eventually gonna get annoyed and do a Virgin Chad in which the Virgin is a virgin because they've been bullied their entire lives, and yeah, so more efficient, less expensive, because it's more efficient to force people from Dallas to detour through Fort Worth. And short-sighted, inefficient. But yeah, I mean, yes, you have that, but it's not actually efficient to do this, and even the reverse T-bone, so Dallas to like the thing that is being done now, it's very different. Okay, again, you're not doing Temple and Waco. You're focusing on the strongest of the three legs. Okay, this was supposed to be a 2-hour stream, and we're about to hit 9 in the evening. So yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the Texas T-bone, I mean, again, I think I explained it a couple of weeks ago if you were here. I can't tell if it's an OCD thing or what, but I know that I have very strong opinions about whether maps should be geographically accurate or schematic, and I'm a very strong fan of geographically accurate-ish. So I think the T-bone idea was originally this. The idea was that you would take the train would take you from a little city to the airport from which you would fly elsewhere, because why would you ever just go to Dallas without a car? And then that turned into, and then, for example, when Yonah Freemark did this, I think he started out by doing Fort Worth first, but after I and others complained in comments, he changed it to something like this. So Dallas has this tail to Fort Worth, but really the important part is Dallas. So this is roughly the main leg of the T-bone, and then there's the Houston College Station, Temple, and I think people even wanted an extension from that to be like more of a cross than a T-bone to Killeen because of Fort Hood. For I guess soldier travel, like Fort Hood is an enormous military base. I think it's 50,000 troops are stationed there. It might be the biggest American military base. I am not sure. I knew this in December when I was writing the actual invasion in World War III reel, because the Chinese, the PRC invasion of America in that story, they kind of have this bit, I mean, after they've taken over the coasts, when they actually get to Killeen and to the actual attack on Fort Hood is kind of like the main battle that forces whatever is left of the United States to surrender. But this is either way, it's an enormous military base. But I also don't know how much travel soldiers generate. I mean, I know that there are soldiers who ride trains. I don't know quantitatively whether I should think of a base with 50,000 soldiers as a thing that generates X amount of train travel per year. But it can't be too important. I mean, compared with Houston, which is a city of 7 million with all the suburbs. So I'm kind of skeptical of Fort Hood as a big ridership generator, if that makes sense. Are there any more questions? I know that we've swerved a lot from the original topic. All right. As I said, it was supposed to be a 1.5 hour stream. There were people who thought it would be a 45-minute stream because I said at 5:15 and 40. I'm going to stream how to. I think what I said at 5:15 was I'm going to stream about how to how to retrofit transit into an auto-oriented city in 45 minutes, and then everyone joked that that this is about how to fix a city in 45 minutes. I thought it was going to be an hour and a half, then two. I mean, schedule overruns are a thing, even among people who study schedule and budget overruns. It's a thing that happens. So I mean, except for our project, I guess, where we're somewhat behind schedule, for which I mostly blame Corona, but only mostly. We're not excessively behind schedule. We're way under budget. But these things happen, you see. It's very easy to keep discussing. It's very easy to keep answering more questions, to keep going on tangents. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will end the stream. Hopefully I'll be able to upload. Hopefully it didn't randomly stop recording the way it did 2 weeks ago. Which is the reason I didn't upload 2 weeks ago is it's a huge file, but shortly before I finished, it stopped recording. And because it stopped recording, it would have been just really weird to upload it because I don't do video editing. Yeah, it's actually hard to stick to that Swiss spouting interest. By the way, about itemizing my topics, first of all, I interact with people in chat. Second of all, I've been through enough meetings that had printed agendas in advance. That doesn't help. It's just a known thing. I mean, things run over. Just a lot of active control. This is the way managers exist. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I'm gonna cut this now. Again, I don't think I can raid, but let me actually go on Twitch. Okay, I don't want to go on my own Twitch because that's gonna be a chore. I do not know if she's online, but go watch Boom if she's online. Because she doesn't allow people to raid her because of weird Twitch algorithm issues. So she is a StarCraft 2 player who is, I believe, either Masters 1 or Masters 2. She plays Zerg, and she is incredibly cheesy. Her idea is to just make lots of banelings, which she calls booms, and yeet them at the enemy until the enemy dies and types GG. She's very good. So ciao ciao, and see you guys this time, -3 hours, next week.